you.
Thank you so
All the
much.
best.
Great. Good morning, everyone. It is such a privilege to be here today. The program says Adaiah was going to be here. She's unable to be with us today, so I'm stepping in. Yeah, it's day 3. It's a graveyard session, but I hope it's going to be really exciting with what we'll be sharing with you in the next hour. So the last 2.5 days, we've really heard about the need for digitization and data. And today in the session, we'll be speaking about a really, really exciting collaboration that has been happening between the National Treasury, SARS, and UniWider through a program called SA-IDL, where essentially we have a data lab where anonymized tax data is made available for research and policy making. So Bruce will be taking us through that in a moment. Then we will chat a little bit about what kind of research can we do with this data? What is the importance of this data? And what are some of the gaps in the publicly available data that currently is available in South Africa? And how can the tax data fill these gaps? Then we'll break for some questions from the floor as well as on the Slido app. And then we'll head over to Andrew, who's done really fantastic work in collaboration with the National Treasury and the HSRC, where they've used the tax data and they've spatially aggregated it, and they've made this data available for local municipalities and metros, as well as the research community. And then we'll be looking a little bit ahead of what are we currently working on and how do we plan on getting multiple government departments to work together to share data. Great, so first up, Bruce. He is a data developer at the United Nations University World Institute for Development Economics Research. For short, UniWider. Please welcome me, help me in welcoming Bruce.
Hi everyone, thanks Marlies for the introduction. Yeah, as Marlies said, it's the graveyard shift, so it might make our job a little bit tricky. I also think our job is a bit tricky because we've got very big shoes to follow. I thought that the act before was really inspiring. William, Mark, and Pumelo, well done. I think you guys can be proud of what you're doing. Okay, so Marlies and Andrew and I work together in the lab, the data lab that we have in the Treasury, and I'm just going to explain to you what the lab is and how it works. So if we can go to my next slide. Yeah, so these are kind of the 3 main points or goals of the lab. We have the data. It's from SARS. It's the tax data. It's been anonymized. And it basically goes back to 2011 when it became legally necessary to submit your tax forms on e-filing. And so we try to make this data available for research purposes. There's all sorts of researchers that come to the lab. Quite a lot of them come through WIDER. But there's also researchers coming from the Treasury side. And in theory, anyone can access the data. You just have to write to Treasury and motivate, and then you'll be vetted. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. So yeah, we try to create policy-relevant research, data-driven decision-making to help the state know what it's doing so that policymakers aren't making decisions in the dark. And it's also kind of a networking place where we bring together SARS, Treasury. We have a bunch of other, we sometimes consult with like UK ONS or UK Data Archive. So it's a place to gather and to talk about these things. Yeah, okay, I think we can go to the next slide. Okay, so in this slide, we're just going to discuss why use admin data. There's a couple reasons that make it really attractive as a data source. The first is that you have very high end. You have a lot of people in the data. And compared to household surveys, one of the nice things about it is that you can't not submit your tax forms. If you do that, you'll basically go to jail, right? So it's different to a household survey where you can opt not to answer. So because of that, we have very high response rates. In other words, we don't have much attrition. Only if someone was not tax compliant would they not appear in the data. And yeah, because it's very rigorously collected every year, it lends itself to what we'd call like a panel nature, where you can track someone over time and see how things change. As I mentioned, we have very large sample sizes. And in a way, it's a lot cheaper than household surveys or other surveys where you go out and you ask people questions. And that's because the data already exists. There's already this massive state infrastructure to gather all the data, and we're just kind of harnessing that. So yeah, those are the pros of admin data. The downside is that because it's not designed for research, we're kind of having to repurpose it, and often it's quite messy. It's just been set up to do the job it was supposed to do, collect tax, and we're repurposing it. So often the things we need to understand from the data haven't actually been very well documented at SARS. And we do a lot of reverse engineering to figure out what we're really looking at in the data, which is the second point here. And then, yeah, we can't, with the survey, you have the nice feature that you can just design it as you want. So if you want to add a question, for example, race, you can put in population group in the survey, and you'll get that out of the data. If there's a variable that we don't have in our data, we don't have the power to add it to the questionnaire. So that's one of the downsides of admin data. You can take me to my next slide, please. Okay, so I'll just talk a little bit practically about what the lab looks like. You can go to the next slide, please. Oh yeah, I do actually have a clicker. Sorry about that. Okay, so this is what it looks like. We have these terminals. There's currently 12 of them. And each of them, you'll log into it. You'll have like login details. And you connect to the server over here, just hiding in the corner there. You guys can't see it. It's, in my opinion, a very awesome, powerful server. We have 1.5 terabytes of RAM, and I think we have about 50 terabytes of storage on it at the moment. But we're basically trying to quadruple that because we're constantly running out. But yeah, that's what the setup looks like. It's inside the National Treasury. You can see out the window there. It's on the 20th floor. Okay, let me try to use the clicker this time. Okay, so this is what I call the data pipeline. This is how the data gets to us and how we end up using it. There's basically two types of submissions. You're either a person or you're a firm. In either case, you'd fill out a tax form. It'll go to SARS, which is what this little signpost represents. Physically, it's at SARS. In like a massive, you can call it a warehouse or a data lake. Then they deliver it to us, and we store it also in SQL format, like .mdf. And then we convert it to the format that we like to work in, which happens to be Stata, but you could do it in whatever language you wanted to if you were doing your own lab. And then we split it again into the individual side and the firm side. We do a bunch of cleaning, and there's a couple reasons that we do it, and I'll show you just now. There's some things that it's like natural to do, and everyone would want to do it. So we try to save people's time by doing it for them. And then we share it to the research community. There's kind of also a backward feedback system set up where they can report a problem to us, and we'll report it back to SARS if there's something that we don't understand about the data. And then the idea is that it can be used to formulate policy. So for example, Treasury will use it to do tax modeling or to help develop the budget. Okay, so I think the details here aren't that exciting for you guys, but this is just a list of the data sets that we have. Maybe the most important would be PAYE, your IRP5 in South Africa, and your CIT, your corporate income tax, which is your IT14 tax form. There's a couple other little ones that we also have, but I won't talk to those now. So what we do as the data preparers is we kind of make these products, these pre-created panels, and what we essentially do is take all the information we can on firms, and we combine it. So your corporate income tax, your individual level PAYE, like you can add it up to get how many people are working for this firm, your VAT and your customs. That's our first product, which we call the matched firm panel. And then on the other side, everything about individuals, which would be your IRP5 that your boss fills out, and your ITR 12, which you or your tax practitioner fill out. We combine those to make what we call the matched individual panel. So those are kind of two cool products that we share with the researchers. We make sure we have a very big focus on data safety, and we use this principle that we borrowed from the UK Data Archive, from Felix, who wrote about the 5 safes. I'll just briefly go through what each of them are. People, project, setting, data, and output. So safe people, we vet everyone quite carefully. If they come in, they have to sign an NDA, they have to do an oath. We'll check who they are, if they actually have a background in this field. And they'll also have to specify what they want to do with the data. So they'll describe what they're doing, and we can check if they're trying to identify people or do something. Maybe they're trying to learn about their competitors in the market. That project wouldn't be allowed. So the person and their project kind of gets vetted at the same time. And if Treasury and wider are happy with it, then they come into the lab. The lab is an offline lab. It's starting to feel a little bit archaic, but that's how it works at the moment. It's an enclave. So the server is connected to the terminals, but none of it is connected to the internet, which has some really big advantages. Basically, we know only the people that go in through the door can do anything to the data. We don't have to worry about it being hacked. We don't have to worry about people stealing it. So it's a very secure setting, although it does mean everyone has to come to Treasury to access the data. But that's how we're operating at the moment. The data itself is also secure. So when we get it from SARS, they kind of treat it. They take out certain variables, like they take out people's names and firms' names. We do get some identifiers, which we need to make a panel, but those are anonymized, they're hashed. So SARS has like a hashing algorithm that they apply, and they don't share it with us. Then lastly, when someone actually has output that they want to take out, there's like literally one USB port that works, the rest don't work, and we'll carefully check what they're requesting to take out on the server, and then take it out if it's safe. So these are kind of the 5 things that we do to make sure the data are safe. And yeah, Marlies will speak a little bit just now about all the different projects that have happened so far, and then Andrew will talk about some geodata that he's been working with, and also the future and how we're going to try to combine these with other government departments. But just to let you know, if you wanted to get access to the data, there's 2 like streams. The one is through SA-IDL, which is just the name for this like collaborative project between Treasury and SARS and wider. And these will normally have like some funding, and there'll be an RFP. You write a proposal to say why you think you're the guy for the job, and you could do it that way. The other way is just to go to Treasury, and in general, there's no funding, although I guess you could try like arrange some privately. But yeah, you'd send your proposal to Treasury, and hopefully they'll accept.
Treasuries.
Okay, I think that's, I don't know why Marlies is laughing so much, but I think that's me. So I'm going to hand over to her. Thanks.
I've only been with the Treasury for a month, but I hear Treasury is somewhat stingy, so I'm not sure whether they'll be handing out any money. Great. Okay, so I'll be speaking a little bit and taking where Bruce has left off, and be speaking about a little bit about the importance about the tax data. What gaps does it fill in South Africa? What kind of research should we be doing, and are we currently doing with the tax data, and how is this actually infiltrated to the policymaking sphere in South Africa? Okay, so very briefly, these are just some of the points that I'll be speaking to. I think for this audience, we all know why we need good data, but we'll quickly go through that. I'll sketch a landscape of what data is currently available in South Africa, and identify some of the gaps and how the tax data can actually fill these gaps. Then we'll be chatting through some of the research that has been conducted, and the link to policy making. So why do we need good data? We need evidence-based research to be able to inform policy making. If we don't know how many citizens there are that need a specific service, we don't know what policies and how much budget to allocate to them. And then the question is, once a policy is implemented, did it meet its intended target? And are we getting bang for our buck? Is it really good use of our resources? So if we just look at publicly available microdata in South Africa, a lot of data is available already on individuals, but there are a lot of challenges with data that's collected on individuals in particular through household surveys, right? If Stats SA comes to your office and they knock on your door, do you have 2 hours to fill out the form? If the riches in the country say, I would like to not respond, how much income I earn, those pose really big challenges. So the underreporting of income is a particularly big challenge globally, not only in the South African case. But globally, it's always thought about the underreporting happens right at the top end of the income distribution. Recent work by Andrew Kerr from the University of Cape Town, he actually combined and looked at distributions of the tax data from a wage earning perspective, and he combined it with a bunch of household survey data, and he actually says, he estimates that the underreporting is across the income distribution. It's not only at the top. And if we just think about the policies that have been implemented the last couple of years, let's think about the national minimum wage. If there's a lot of underreporting that is done in the household surveys, how do we know at which level to replace the national minimum wage, for instance. Then also many policy questions, you need to be able to follow individuals over time. So we have the QLFS, we have a rotating panel, and you can, I think, observe individuals only for 4 waves, which is really in the short, very, very short run. So you can't really say what happens to this individual once they receive a policy shock 2 or 3 or 4 years down the line. In South Africa, we had NT-SDF. It stopped after 5 waves. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the last one was released in 2018. So currently, we don't really have a lot of information on individuals over a really long time span. On the firm side, the data that's publicly available is even more sparse. A lot of data is being collected that is actually nationally representative, but the microdata is not often released. We get information about sectors and industries on an aggregate level, but we aren't able to say, let's look at all of the manufacturing firms in South Africa and track them over time. How has load shedding impacted them, for instance? And this really leaves a big gap. But this is where the tax data comes in, and it can fill a really, really great gap. So the tax data starts in 2008. So if you have been compliant, you would be observed for 16 years, either as a firm or as an individual. Is there anyone in this room who has, for 16 years in a row, filled out a household survey? Okay, I thought so. Right? No one. But you would be observed if you are working in the formal economy, you would be observed in the tax data. So this is incredibly powerful. So it really allows us to analyze what is happening when a firm or an individual receives a shock. May it be the pandemic, may it be a policy change. So some of the research that has been done on the tax data, it goes across a lot of thematic areas: firms, productivity, and competition. How much concentration is there in the economy? Unemployment, wages, income inequality, taxes, and trade. And in some cases, the tax data is the only data set that can answer specific questions. So let's touch on 4 quick examples that have used the tax data to answer some policy-relevant questions. So perhaps the most studied policy intervention is the employment tax incentive, also known as the youth wage subsidy. So this was a policy that was introduced, I think, in 2014, and it's administered via SARS, via the tax system. And essentially, we want to know, is it effective at getting the youth into jobs? Could it be that people that are just above the age threshold are losing out on job opportunities because the employer is just moving towards slightly younger workers? What happens to this individual 5 years down the line? They used to get the ETI. Did it actually improve the long-term employability of this individual? And those are some of the questions that we can answer. The ETI has been very debated, and if you look at even the results in this paper, you use the same data. The results have been quite mixed. It's filtered into discussions at NEDLAC and Parliament, so it's also not saying that we have the best data. Using a different methodology, you sometimes do still get to different answers, but there's a lot of transparency in this process. Then, a couple of years ago, the National Treasury introduced a top marginal tax bracket of 45%. So what do you think? What is the expectation in general? If you raise the taxes, okay, there will be some behavioral shift, but you would expect potentially for revenue to increase, right? Tax revenue. Using the tax data, the author showed tax revenue actually decreased. Taxpayers, right at the top end of the income distribution, maneuvered their tax matters so much that SARS collected less revenue. And using the micro data, we were able to quantify this. And now we can go back to the drawing board. what should we be doing? So Treasury was really fantastic. At the same time, they knew, okay, if marginal tax rates are going up, some of the directors of companies, they could potentially be paying themselves some dividends. At the same time, with immediate effect, they actually increased the dividend tax from 15 to 20%. But despite this, we saw these massive behavioral responses. Then, in 2013, minimum wages in the agricultural sector increased by 52%. It's one of the largest minimum wage shocks that we've actually seen for a very, very long time. Very often, when we think about the effect of minimum wages, we think about how does the firm who has workers who are eligible to get the minimum wage, how are they impacted, right? But there was research that was done who actually showed throughout the value chain, throughout the supply chain, firms that were indirectly affected by the minimum wage shock had a decrease in sales, employment, and assets. So when we think about implementing the national minimum wage or adjusting these before they were done on a sectoral level, but what are some of these spillover effects? And we can quantify this. Very often in the South African or global case, we would look at what happens to employment levels. Using the tax data, we can actually look at how do firms respond when they were faced with this increase in the minimum wage. Did they stop hiring new workers, or did they let go of workers? And this really matters if you think a little bit about the agricultural sector, about them being an employer of last resort. And the research showed that the firms actually just stopped hiring workers for 4 years. It was predominantly the non-seasonal workers that were affected. Then a paper that was cited very extensively also in the media was on profit shifting. So Ludwig Weir and Haley Reynolds, they showed that firms that were owed by a parent company that was in a tax haven avoided taxation as much as 80% of their true income. SARS and National Treasury can now actually go back to the drawing board and say, okay, how do we catch this revenue and ensure that these companies are paying their taxes? Great. This is a really fantastic study, but I am running out of time, so let me move on. This week, what was introduced was a two-part retirement system. We will be getting this data very, very soon. So we'll be able to analyze what was the impact, who, by age, by gender, by location, who's pulling from the pots, and what is the effect on tax revenue. And we can feed these learnings back into the policy making. So I need to double check, but I think roughly 100 papers have been written on the tax data. So there's a huge body of evidence that is open access. Everyone can have access to it. Through the program under which this operates, we've also tried to make the findings very digestible. So have policy dialogues and blogs and policy briefs, etc. It's filtered directly into policy making within the Treasury. And I think what Bruce was speaking about, we've really showcased that that data can actually be shared across government institutions, and it can be made available for research in a very safe manner. We've been doing this for 10 years, and we've had no breach, which is fantastic. Jan, I think just from my side, I think this is really a hope and a call to action for government departments to realize the power of sharing their data, and that we ultimately can improve the lives of our citizens. Great, thank you. Okay, we can take a couple of questions from the floor, and then we'll head over to Andrew's presentations. Any questions? Yes, got two in front.
Well, thank you for the wonderful presentation. It's quite insightful, especially for some of us who are interested in the tax administration data, because kind of it helps to take care of the attrition or unit non-response, which is a problem prevalence in the survey data. But now my question is, I see like the way you have explained the collaboration sharing between SARS and the National Treasury. I think that's great. But why do I have to come all the way from Cape Town to Pretoria? I mean, to the secure center to get the data. Why can't you make it easier for me to just get it? I mean, I can just go to the portal and kind of download it. Why do I have to come all the way to Pretoria? Thank you.
Thanks. I knew I was going to get this question, or we were going to get this question. So a fun fact, 5 years ago, I used to live in Cape Town. I relocated to Pretoria to be able to work for on the tax data, and I've stayed for 4 years. So the tax data is actually so powerful that you want to stay here. I'm joking. I'm actually relocating back to the Cape in about a month. No, I think you raise a really good point, and I think the reach that we'll be able to get when we do have online access will be far greater. But we're also not quite there yet. So these would also be discussions that we need to have with SARS. I'm looking at Mamiki here. So it's definitely something that we'd like to put on the table and investigate. But these are conversations that we still need to have and need to investigate properly. Yes. Great.
Okay. Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. One of your slides had got areas of future research. And one thing that I thought would be useful, I don't know if it's been done already, but I read a newspaper article this past week where there was concern about some of the customs tariffs which they've remained unchanged for decades. And the impact of these tariffs, some of them might have been imposed for temporary protection, but now they seem to become part of the tariff landscape, and there is an impact in terms of opportunity cost for industries that use some of those items that are now affected by the high tariffs. So I don't know if that perhaps would be something to have a closer look at.
Yes.
Thanks.
So the two slides that I actually skipped were exactly on ITAC decisions. So since 2009, I think there were 392 applications for tariff changes. And we've actually looked, or current research is looking at what are the impacts of these tariff increases and decreases on import volumes and the number of firms that are importing, etc. So that's unfortunately what I needed to skip, but I can show you the graphs afterwards. For the sake of time, we'll head over to Andrew. I met Andrew about 5 years ago, also in the data lab. He spent a lot of time there, and he's an independent consultant for HSRC. And yeah, let's welcome Andrew.
Thanks, Marlies. Just checking you can hear me. Yeah, it sounds like it. So I'm going to be talking today about the Spatial Tax Panel, but I think just quickly I'm going to give you a little brief introduction into Seed SA, the program that funded this work. This is primarily a partnership between the Human Sciences Research Council and National Treasury City Support Program. And I mean, there obviously are a lot of other stakeholders that you can see on our websites. I'm going to skip over them for now. I think importantly that National Treasury City Support Program focus has meant that the framing of this has meant to fill a void in data left for municipalities. So this has come directly from several municipalities trying to answer a question about this big data gap in local economic, sub-municipal economic data. So that's what we've tried to do with the Spatial Tax Panel. So we've built everything off of what Bruce and Marlies have done at the Secure Data Facility at National Treasury. So this leverages data that comes directly from SARS on various tax types. The backbone of this being your pay-as-you-earn data. So this is the kind of money that gets deducted from you monthly from your salary. And so obviously there's a couple of gaps where we wouldn't have any informal workers, sole proprietors, or self-employed people, but I think for the most part this covers a very broad tax base. I think importantly for us, these submissions are completed for every taxpayer that earns over 2,000 Rand per annum. And there's a lot of useful information here that helps us build the spatial tax panel. So importantly, there's a work address, which only had a postal code information, but I'm quite excited to announce that we are starting to geocode that data, and we're looking at ways we can start using that geocoded data to better allocate the spatial area that someone might be working in. But there's other important information here, such as age, earnings, industry, sex, etc., that you can pull from that data set. We then merge together various other tax types, such as firm-level information, VAT, or customs information, to add more nuance to the employer-employee relationships that we're looking at. There's also the opportunity that you could be merging this onto a broad range of other data sets in the future. So whether that be something like UIF or basic and higher education data to look at education outcomes, or social grants to look at people moving in and out of the unemployment system or the employment system. There's a lot of opportunity as we start to explore other avenues to get data and try and integrate that together. So what we did with that, as Marlies alluded to earlier, is that we took that information and we've aggregated it to various spatial levels, various temporal levels, and across several aggregate variables, so we can look at specific things within the data to try and assess what might be happening based for let's say, for youth employment, or for specific sectors, or in specific cities, or in specific regions of specific cities. So this is broken down as follows. We have the spatial variables, and I think importantly to note here that this is primarily based on where people work, not where they live. We have national data, which would aggregate all employment nationally. There's also provincial and district data sets for specific cases where you wouldn't be able to aggregate data up. We have municipal data, postal code data, and then what we've done, particularly for the sub-municipal data, and being able to visualize that, is disaggregated that postal code information into hexagons using Uber's H3 framework. And this gives you a very granular view of what might be happening economically in the city. And I'll illustrate that just now with a small demo. Then we have temporal components, and this really is broken down into either tax years, which the data is generally reported at, or in months, which we can do for the employment level data. We then have output variables, which is essentially what we're counting for each of these aggregations of data that we do. So we have the employee level data, which looks at the total number of full-time equivalent employees, median income levels, Gini coefficients, or establishment level data, which would be the number of establishments that are operating within that sector, or within that firm size, or something like that. And then we aggregate these by a variety of different variables that can all be used to start answering very specific questions, whether that be industry or wage band, age group or youth status, sex, immigration, as well as some of the establishment level indicators like firm size, how many firms are opened or closed, the import or export status of those firms, or whether they belong to a firm that has many establishments, or they're kind of a single establishment firm. I think importantly, this data is publicly available now, and I'll do a quick demo on our website, but anyone in this room could go and access that. If you wanted to download the data, you'd need to just log in, but anyone could access the dashboards to start exploring the data. I think importantly to note that data generally has a 12-month lag, and if you were inclined and you wanted to access the actual raw data, you can do this at the Secure Data Facility at National Treasury. You just need to put a request through the channels that Bruce mentioned earlier. So I think another important thing to think about is how are municipalities using this now? And I think this is by no means exhaustive. This is just some of the feedback that we've gotten. I think, and some of the use cases we know about, I think there's kind of a lot of opportunities here for people to use it. But I think firstly, publicly making this available means there's granular spatial panel data that's available for anyone to use to start understanding what is happening economically across the country, and use that for policy making or monitoring and evaluations. The municipalities have done things like assessing economic performance in specific areas at a sub-municipal level. So that's understanding decline in traditional CBDs, or looking at special economic zones and understanding what might be happening there. Have the policies been working well? When we did make any tweaks, how has this changed things? Looking at the impacts of events like COVID or flooding or riots, looking specifically at the case of eThekwini, evaluating the recovery of specific areas or sectors post-COVID. You can drill down to a specific area or a municipality or a specific sector to say, how has the manufacturing sector recovered post-COVID? Developing regional economic development strategies, or even trying to solve a problem that came up with the city of Cape Town, where they were trying to understand where copper theft was more likely to happen. And so they were starting to look where there were scrap yards located around the city, and they were using the data to try and help them run some analysis on that. Then the research community is using this for all kinds of ways, and I'm going to kind of skim over this in the interest of time, but whether that's doing accessibility analysis and understanding where people work, or building economic complexity indices, or looking at things like establishment dynamics and the shocks there. And then several private sector stakeholders have also started to incorporate this into their models that they build that often get sold back to different government agencies or to research communities. What I'll try to do now is just give you a quick demo. So again, this is all, you could go to this URL now, spatialtaxdata.org.za, and download this data, or go to these dashboards. Can we swap across to the dashboard? So when you do that, this would be the home page where you come to, and you'll see there's a couple options here. Firstly, I'd just like to touch on the ones we're not going to go through now. You could download the data. You will have to log in here, but the turnover time to log in is very quick. We just ask you a couple of questions about what your intentions are for the data and whether you'd like to be kept abreast of what is happening. And then we also publish resources where people might be using the data, or publishing articles or research, or using it for specific cases. We then have our standard dashboards. So here, you could really drill down to any province, district, or municipality, and given that we're in Tshwane today, I'll focus on Tshwane. So within that, I could select any municipality in the whole country, but I will select Tshwane. We can get a sense of what employment looked like in Tshwane over the range that the panel's in. So in this case, it's 2014 to 2023. You can see how employment was kind of steadily growing, but then kind of was shocked by COVID. And I think the case of Tshwane is actually interesting because it had less of a shock given the high government concentration here where people weren't losing their jobs. I think importantly from the dashboard's perspective, you could print this and use this figure yourself. You could also print all these dashboards, which we'll see some of them now, but I would encourage you to go through it and explore it in your own time. You can also download the underlying data that's used for each of these dashboards in the event that you wanted to plug it into your own visualization. Sorry, I'm just going to move that around. So we can see things like the sectoral breakdown within Tshwane. We can see that high dominance of government employment, followed by administrative services, retail, manufacturing, and education, which I think, if you know anything about Tshwane, kind of makes sense with what you'd expect to see happening. We could see that wage distribution and compare this to other wage distributions in other municipalities and track that over time to understand, have any policy interventions affected where people might be sitting in that income distribution. I think interestingly for Tshwane, the highest income band is actually in that 25 to 51,000 rand per month range, which is different from any other municipality, and I think that's due to the dominance of those government employment jobs in Tshwane. I'm going to skip through some of these. This is looking at changes, and we can see where job growth might be happening or not happening. So you can see growth, for instance, in the government sector and education as being the highest. I'm going to jump around a bit here. This is a breakdown from the sectors again, but I think what's nice with this is you can look at it drilling down to higher levels, so not just the one-digit level which the previous figure had. So we can see again that government kind of makes up a quarter of employment in all of Tshwane, followed by admin services, retail. We can see manufacturing, we can see what kind of manufacturing is here. So, we have motor vehicles as being the highest employer in terms of manufacturing, followed by food products, fabricated metal products, which feeds into that car manufacturing, as well as then seeing beverages come up next. And And I think you can start to, as a municipality or as a researcher, start using data like this to help you work out where there might be opportunities for the municipality to focus on expanding or encouraging businesses to develop, given their existing competitive advantages. I'm going to jump across to the Map Explorer now, just to illustrate that quickly. You can kind of move in here and break the data down in any way that you would like to. I will focus on Tshwane again, but just to illustrate, you could select the spatial level as all provinces, look at it without any kind of lens or framing or aggregate variables, and just look at total employment, and we'll choose 2020 as just a year to use, and we can see that concentration of employment at Gauteng, the Western Cape, and KwaZulu. But we could drill down then to say, what does that look like from a municipal perspective across the country, to see how that differs within provinces. And we can break this down further by aggregating that across things like wage band or sex or immigration status, how many youth are employed in those areas, and there's a couple cross tabulations that use multiple variables there, so whichever way you're inclined to use it, you can, as well as then changing the actual view that you're looking at. Again, you could always download the data and build these out yourself, but if you aren't familiar with analytics or GIS, this is an easy way for you to kind of explore that. I'll drill down to Tshwane now, just to give us a quick sense of how you'll do it, and I'll stick to looking at employees. I won't do anything except for the total number of employees, and we can kind of see here that the concentration is in Pretoria CBD, with things moving towards Menlyn and those areas as we head to Pretoria East, as well as then Centurion sticking out. You can kind of manipulate this yourself to look at like a linear scale or a log scale, depending what you like to see, or you can edit those mins and maxes if you think they might adjust what you would like to be seeing. But we could then break that down to say, okay, we knew manufacturing in the car sector was one of the largest sectors in eThekwini. So if we did want to look where those were located, and again, we could start looking at the trends over time for employment here. Let's move to manufacturing of motor vehicles, and we'll look at it from an absolute perspective initially, and we can kind of see Rosslyn standing out, which, as many of you know, is an automotive hub. We can see parts of Silverton standing out, and we can see Pretoria CBD. We could look at that in terms of the percentage within the municipality to see how that compares, or we can look at, the percentage within that area of job concentration to see which areas is automotive or manufacture of motor vehicles concentrated. And we can see Rosslyn kind of standing out here above anything else. But importantly, we could also then look at the change here. So I could say, I want to see how automotive jobs have changed between 2015 and 2020. And we can see that parts of Rosslyn have grown while others have actually shrunk. And Pretoria CBD and Silverton have both grown. But you could really break this down however you want to understand a specific question that you might be wondering, or given a specific problem that anyone might have. I think I'll leave this there for now and move across quickly to another project that we're working on called the South African Integrated Data Lake. Can we switch back to the presentation, please? Thanks. So, I just want to emphasize what I'm presenting now is really an initial concept. I'm quite excited by the fact that a team has been appointed, a company called Open Cities Lab, and they are starting to kind of move this concept into a reality. They're exploring how to flesh out those ideas a little bit better, how to practically achieve this, and starting to build relationships between different government agencies to start making this possible and sharing data and setting up the systems to do this. The idea really is to start integrating different data sets from different government agencies and sharing these between all agencies so people can use them to help with policy making or monitoring and evaluation or just understanding what might be happening in the country. That's not always immediately clear. And government really does collect a lot of data that isn't always used for these kind of purposes. Building on from the National Treasury Secure Data Facility, We've obviously got people like SARS there, but it's also exploring other government agencies like the CIPC or SASA for grants data, or Stats SA for some of their other statistical products or survey data, the Department of Employment and Labor for unemployment insurance fund payments and claims to understand people moving in and out of employment, the National Population Register to just make sure we have a proper allocation of people, understanding familial relationships, or just looking at making sure we actually are accounting for people who might not be employed and not registered for tax, for instance. Education data, or deeds or cadastral data, as well as data from the private sector. The intention here really then is to build a South African integrated data lake, digital exchange layer, or digital services layer. And this would really be about, I think firstly, creating MOUs and SLAs and creating a rubric that can be standardized, where you can start to say, this is how we share it, these are the rules that govern that process, as well as setting in place access protocols for how that exchange layer works. And I think a key part of this would also be making sure we establish data standards and metadata for all these different agencies and the data they hold, to make sure that can be shared as efficiently as possible. And the idea here really is to automate this process as much as possible through APIs, but knowing that different agencies and different data sets require different security standards, that there may be differences here and we may require different processes. As part of this, we would also have a secure offline environment, and the idea here is really to start building data sets that we might not want to be in the public domain, managing those in a better sense. So, data would flow from that information exchange layer into the digital exchange layer into the secure offline environment, where a team of people would be responsible for cleaning data, merging data, finding ways to merge it, building panels, building aggregated data like the spatial tax panel that can be released publicly, or just making data sets that can be used for different components. And you would have a flow kind of between that offline environment at regular intervals, moving to the digital exchange layer so that data could be shared publicly, or between agencies, or wherever that may be. From this, there's really three ways we're envisaging this. So the first one would be for research, following very closely on from what the Secure Data Facility has been successful at doing, is putting de-identified merged panels of these different types of data in a space where someone could conduct research on them and start helping answer policy questions. The idea would be for this to be available to anyone at request, following a similar process to the Secure Data Facility. So whether you're in academia or the government or a private institution, provided you have good reason to access the data, you would be allowed to access that. The next would be for regulation and compliance, and this is just, through that exchange layer, making sure that people have access to things, to run queries, to check something about a taxpayer, for instance, or to understand if a person has died or has been born or has recently married or divorced. You could quite easily just query that and get information without the need to put in a request to the Home Affairs to get this kind of data, or to SARS to get this kind of data. Then we also have the kind of general access area, and this would be through an online portal. I think importantly here, we would have a catalog of all the data, some of the data that's not even available, just so that people could also get a sense of where to go to ask questions, or to which agency or contact person to follow up with there. But I think we would have all the metadata, downloads for specific data sets, and then dashboards and data stories to make that data more accessible for different people. So I'll leave it there. It's a lot of information, and again, just to stress, this is the initial concept. The team that's been appointed is starting to engage with some of the key stakeholders at the moment to understand how practically we would, go about making this work, and to start setting up some of those agreements, as well as exploring if we do want to have any kind of legislative changes to enable this to happen. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. Yes, let's open up some questions from the floor, as well as on Slido.
I'm just going to grab this. There were some hands there.
Yeah, they have the mic.
I think you missed.
Okay, can I go for it? Thanks.
Please.
I'm Ashwal Janikar from Stats SA. Tell me, if people want to get access to your lab, what is the process? And what's the kind of people that does access your lab or could have access to it? Thank you.
So there are two ways in which you can get access to the data. The one is through the collaboration through which the data lab is operated through SA-IDL. So every year we have a call for papers, which is on specific questions or themes where we'd like to conduct some research, and that's typically funded. And then the second way is you contact the NT-SDF, so National Treasury Secure Data Facility at treasury.gov.za, and you submit a proposal. You say you need to showcase the policy relevance. What data would you like to get access to? We assess, is it feasible? Yes, has this research been done before? So those are two broad categories in which you can get access to the data, yes. Also partnering with government officials, for instance, from the different institutions, that's also a nice way to segment into access to the data. I've evaluated proposals for about 4 years now, and we've only declined one proposal after 13 revisions. So if your research is feasible, and it's policy relevant, there are high chances of getting access to the tax data. So we really do see it also as a public good and not keeping it behind shut doors while ensuring that it's being kept safe.
Oh, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm looking into the issue of the integration that you are planning to do with all the departments, especially how are you going to deal with the legacy systems that probably most of these departments are still on? Thank you.
Should I answer now? Yeah, I think part of that is what the team that's been appointed now to start working out, and how to deal with these kind of very complex, very different systems that exist. I think there's also anticipated there's going to be changes to all of these systems over time, and it's making sure the architecture that they set up to govern a process like this, as well as those agreements that they put in place, allow for this to be something that can happen in the future. But I mean, there's no short answer right now of how we're definitely going to solve that. I think part of this is, this was the very rough initial concept, and they're starting to ask questions like this about practically how does this work. And I think to add on to that, not everyone's going to be switched on at once. We're going to kind of target a department and start working with them over a couple of months, couple of years to start building on that.
Okay, thank you. Is Digeledi Voma, GTech employee and a main course student. I just want to check, how do you ensure the accuracy and timelines when collecting spatial economic data, and also what are the main challenges you face when analyzing and interpreting it? Thank you.
Is this specifically with the spatial tax panel? Okay, I mean, so, the data really comes from the tax data. So, it should be every single taxpayer. That gets updated once a year within the secure data facility, but is updated, as people submit their tax forms at SARS. And so in theory, you could increase that speed or turnaround time depending how often you wanted to extract the data, or if you move some of that processing to SARS. But this would, include all formal taxpayers, and you can see this with the way it looks and what we know about what is happening on the ground, or the way it measures up to other survey work on employment, such as the QLFS or QAS, which the data matches very closely to, whether you look at it through a spatial lens or a sectoral lens. In any way the other data sets are aligned, we can see that it is there. And I think ensuring temporally it's there, it is messy, it is kind of administrative data, and there are challenges with that. But generally that is updated regularly, and people do fill their forms out correctly. Because it is administrative, there's a purpose for a tax year being there. And if someone fills it out with the wrong tax year, they often need to resubmit that. And so there's corrections to the form. So when we do an update, we don't just update the final year. We do an update of the last 5 years, and every couple of years we do a full re-extraction of the full panel. And you can see that there's maturity issues along the full spectrum of, I mean, obviously you're talking about 1 or 2% of the data being updated after 2 or 3 years, but those are changes that do get reflected and updated with each release of the data.
Great. I see where time is up. Thank you so much for your engagement, and yeah, thanks to Andrew and Bruce.